In this lecture, we're going to continue building out our navigation by adding these menu items. So if we go back to our code in index.html, we want to go ahead and add another div within our nav tag, and we want this div to fill the remaining space of this nav tag. So where we've got this first div here, because the nav tag is displaying flex, this first div here is only ever going to grow to the size of its contents. So if we take a look in the browser at our project, and if we inspect the element for our logo, and if we select the top level div tag here within the nav tag, we can see that the width of this div is only ever the width of its contents. So then we want another div here. So this second div here, we want it to span the entire or the remaining width of this navbar. So to do that, if we go back to our code, we can add a flex of 1 here, which will mean this div will fill the remaining space of this navbar. And then we want to make sure that this is display flex as well, because then we want to align our items centrally. So this align items here. So an align items of center will mean it will align vertically within the navbar. Then we want to justify end, which means all of the children within this div will shift to the right hand side, so it'll shift to the end of the navbar. So this second div is going to span the entire width or the entire remaining width of the navbar, and because we're going to display flex on this div and then we add the justify end for those children within the div, it's going to shift the children all the way over to the right hand side. So back in our code then, let's go ahead and add our menu items. So the first menu item is going to have the label of home. So let's go ahead and save this and take a look in the browser first. Let's give it a refresh just to make sure that our styles have been applied correctly and the menu items are indeed being shifted to the right hand side. So that's looking great so far. So for our first menu item then, we want to add a bunch of classes. So the first class is going to be relative, and the reason we want to add a relative class and want to add these to all of our menu items is because if we take a look at the completed project and our tickets menu with the submenu items, the submenu items are going to be displaying absolute, which means the top level menu item needs to have a position of relative, because the submenu items are going to have a position of absolute, and then we can position this absolute submenu item relative to this ticket's main menu item. So that's the reason we want to add a relative class to our menu items. So then we want to add a display of flex. We want to add a h full, which will give this a height of 100%. So if we take a look in the completed project, it means this menu item will span from the top down to the bottom in height. And then we're adding a display flex because we want this label to centrally align vertically and horizontally within this menu item. So then let's go ahead and add those classes. We want an items center, which again will align our items centrally on the vertical axis. Then let's give it a padding all round of 4, which will be 16 pixels. Let's give it a cursor of pointer. We want a font bold, and let's give it a text color of a slightly off-white pink. So let's go text pink 200. So let's save this now before we add any more classes and take a look in the browser. Let's give it a refresh, and there we go. We can see we've got our cursor when we hover over the menu item. From here, what we'd like to do is add some background color whenever we do hover over the menu item, and then we want to make sure our text color for the label is a slightly lighter white, just so it highlights it a little bit more. You might not be able to see it from the video, but when we hover over this text, it does actually produce a whiter color than what we've given it here. So we've given it, when we don't hover over the label, we've given it a text pink of 200. When we hover over it, we want to give it a text zinc of 200, as well as this really light pink background color. Now this light pink background color, we can actually do this with an opacity and a white color. So a slightly translucent white color. Let's go ahead and add that first then. So to target styles, whenever we hover over a particular element, we can use the hover selector. So we can go ahead and add any Tailwind class, exactly like what we've been doing before, adding all these classes in. We can just specify a class that we want to apply whenever we hover over this particular element. So we can add multiple hover selectors to an element. So first of all, let's go ahead and change the text color. Let's go text zinc of 200. So when we're not hovering over this menu item, the text will be pink 200. And when we hover over the menu item, the text will be zinc 200. So let's go ahead and add that background color then. So again, we can add any number of hover selectors to add multiple classes whenever we do hover over a particular element. So then we want to add a background color now. So let's go BG white, but instead of a background of white, we want it to be slightly transparent. So then we can use the slash here, the forward slash, and this will give a transparency as well. So let's go ahead and select the /10. So this will give it a 10% opacity. So let's go hover, BG white /10. Let's give this a save and take a look in the browser now. Give it a refresh and let's hover over our menu item, and there we go. That's looking great. However, this is a little bit too janky. If we take a look at the completed project, we can see when we hover over a particular menu item, the background transition and the color is a little bit smoother. So this is where we can add a transition to our menu item. So let's go back to our code then, and let's add a transition of colors. So this will target the text color, background color, all the colors associated with this particular element. We'll make sure we apply a transition to them. So then we can then specify what type of transition we want. We can have an ease in, an ease out, an ease in out. We could also have a ease linear, for example. So I'm just going to use the ease in out transition, and I'm going to save this now and take a look in the browser again, give it a refresh, and let's hover over our menu item now, and there we go. We can see the nice transition for that background color. So in the next lecture, we're going to add the remaining items for our menu items, and we're going to look at techniques that we can use to help with development of these types of components, because there's a bunch of class names associated with this particular menu item. What if we had, let's say, 5 menu items, but then we wanted to change the styling for all of those 5 menu items? Instead of having to edit the class names individually for each individual menu item, we're going to go over a technique in the next lecture, which will make updating multiple elements of the same type, so for example, multiple menu items, it will make updating those a lot easier. So we'll take a look at all of that in the next lecture.